Hi, welcome to Coping with COVID-19. I'm Tyler Orton here at Business in Vancouver newspaper and BIV.com. So I think we all know that launching a startup, even in pre-pandemic times, is already considered backbreaking. Anything from bad timing to a misread on the market can cause hard work and a fantastic idea to collapse without warning. So, what about navigating the launch of a startup during a pandemic? Our guest today can add some insight into that very topic. Chris Hurd is the CEO of Olive. It's a tech startup headquartered right here in Vancouver that specializes in streamlining decision making for IT products and services. Chris, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. Appreciate it.
So, as you and your team were able to assist, or I guess assess the pandemic, what were some of the main concerns that you guys had as you realized the seriousness of what was going down just a few months ago?
I mean, I think like everybody, this one came a little more out of the blue than many major global events have in previous years. And so assessing it was something we had to do very rapidly. One thing that is interesting about being in a startup is that while it's incredibly high risk and incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging, the one benefit that we have is our ability to pivot. As a small and nimble company, we can make changes and we can make decisions pretty rapidly and affect those changes. So, typically for us, we actually had quite a lot of customers in the restaurant space, so large restaurant chains working with us. And of course, that was an industry that was impacted more than many. So being quite a nimble startup and being able to move, we were actually able to pivot and look at other verticals and identify, okay, well, who is not in that same scenario right now and who is still operating and who is still running business and where can we help? So I think that, the immediate impact for us was thinking about our customers. How can we support the existing restaurant customers? How can we maintain that connection there while also ensuring that the business keeps going on and keeps pushing forward? And for us, that just meant sort of this micro pivot in terms of our messaging and which sort of verticals we were targeting.
Well, it's interesting. Tell me a little bit, I gave a bit of an intro there about what you guys specialize in, but maybe expand on that just a tiny bit and then tell me how the pandemic has had like kind of a direct impact on what you guys do and the way that you guys had to pivot, as you said, just a little bit in order to kind of keep abreast of what's going on right now and across the world.
Yeah, so for context, what we do is we help streamline enterprise technology evaluations. So if you are looking at digital transformation, if you're looking at new technologies, replacing old technologies, or maybe just making a shift within your existing stack, Olive essentially delivers the value that you would get from a digital consultant within software. So what we enable you to do is innovate much faster at a much lower cost to the business and ensure success. And so for us, what was interesting is that while budgets are considerably tighter post-pandemic, cash is very hard to come by for new technologies. The flip side of that is that a lot of companies have realized that they were caught flat-footed from a digital perspective and that their technology wasn't really enabling them to move forward and to innovate the way that they should be. And something like a pandemic really highlights the lack of innovation within the company. And so what we found is that while cash is tight, that innovation isn't slowing down. And so actually the need for the obvious ones of video communication tools that we're talking on today, but there's a whole wealth of digital innovation, particularly in the restaurant industry, like contactless payments, new POS systems that are essential for this new world. And so while initially we had an impact from sort of an outreach standpoint, while we focused and sort of hunkered down more on focusing on our existing customers and figuring out a bit more strategy, as soon as we popped our heads out again, we realized that companies are actually driving innovation much faster now than they were pre-pandemic. And the amount of money they have to spend on those processes is considerably less. So finding a solution where you can innovate faster for less cost, we actually find ourselves in an interesting position where we could be in that one of those few companies that during recessions and during downturns can actually have the effect of transforming an industry simply by being at the right place at the right time.
And that's really what I'm fascinated by, because obviously you guys are seeing an opportunity where much of the economy might be grinding to the halt, but you guys can kind of weave through all of that and see where the opportunity lies. But tell me about some of the challenges that might face you guys right now if you guys are kind of locked down, you're not able to interact with your very tight crew as you would every day, or just going around and meeting new potential customers.
Yeah, I'm an enterprise salesperson myself. That's what I've always done. So I'm an in-person handshake kind of person. That's my bag, and obviously that was impacted. I actually was at a conference earlier this year, which I think may have been one of the last conferences ever in the world, and it was a very interesting experience to be almost. We were already social distancing at that point during this conference, and it was very interesting. Since then, we found not meeting customers in person has an impact. It slows down sales cycles. It means that we have to meet more and more. So there's more and more meetings because to build that trust takes a lot longer. So from a customer perspective, I think that while our solution particularly is all online and actually helps to reduce the amount of meetings needed for the evaluation process, in our own sales cycles, we're seeing the impact of that inability to actually meet and shake hands. Particularly as a lot of our customers are in the US, so I won't be on a plane for another 12 months. Which obviously makes that challenging. From a team perspective, we've actually been relatively remote for quite a while. So since about November last year, I've had to be in the UK for a while. My co-founder was out in Seattle, and I was down in Seattle for a while. And so our team has been relatively dispersed for about 6 to 9 months anyway. And so we actually figured out a good cadence of how to maintain good contact, daily stand-ups, weekly metrics reviews, and ensuring that we're constantly in touch with each other. We've actually managed from a team perspective to keep in touch, which has been fantastic. And then now as things are opening up a little bit more, we're having some sort of social distance meetings in our boardroom, keeping distance apart, but at least being able to see each other. So, I think that it's a change for everybody. Everybody's going through it. But again, I think that being a small, more nimble company and being very tech enabled has helped us to weather the storm a little bit.
So have social distance sales calls become kind of the norm? Are you able to kind of meet up with people, but you're going to have to stay 2 meters away, or are people still mostly preferring to do the old, Zoom chat, for example?
So a lot of our customers are in IT and CIOs and IT managers, etc. And I think that it's fairly novel for them to be working from home. So I actually think that regardless of whether or not you can meet in a social distance environment, I think quite a lot of people are quite enjoying working from home. So then most of our customers are taking the Zoom meetings anyway. There are certainly from an investor standpoint, investors definitely want to be seen in person. They want to meet you. They want to be able to meet you. So having that meeting in a boardroom where you can have a little bit of distance, but at least get that look into someone's eyes and feel that, build that trust from them. That's happening, but it's very slow. And again, being most of our customers and investors being in the US, it makes it incredible. It makes that impossible for us, outside of Vancouver to have any even social distance meetings.
Well, I'm curious, you brought up investors, of course, and you guys are in the midst of a capital raise, if I recall correctly. Tell me a little bit how that experience is going, especially if, as you say, you can't fly down to the Silicon Valley and rub elbows down there.
Well, we can do the elbow tap. I think that
Sure.
it's funny that you bring up rubbing elbows. So yeah, it's a very interesting time to be raising capital. Of course, there are terms coming out that are stricter than you would normally get pre-pandemic. Valuations are considerably lower. However, there is a lot of capital. People are sitting on a lot of capital. There was more capital raised last year than ever in history, and VCs are now sitting on more what we call dry powder or available capital than ever. And so it's there and it's available. The challenge is that, particularly if you're meeting new investors, and particularly for us being a Canadian company, we already have a barrier of being in a different country. As close as we think we are to the US, there is still a big difference. So we have to overcome that barrier. And then with the inability to meet in person, what we're finding is that we're having to meet again with much more members of the team. We're getting introduced to portfolio companies earlier and more often so they can run their own due diligence on us. And so really it's just the whole process is taking a lot longer, and there's a lot more due diligence. That being said, what I think is the general consensus in not just Silicon Valley, but of all technology investors now, is that these times can often be the opportunities when technology companies it's the ideal time to invest. And the reason why is, if we look at the previous recession in 2008, I was in the UK at the time, we got hammered. I know Canada rode that one fairly smoothly, but of course, in America and the UK, 2008 was a huge impact. And what actually happened is we saw incredible innovation in various industries: Uber, WhatsApp, Instagram, Groupon. The list goes on and on of companies that were started then. And I think that investors are aware of that. Investors are aware that if you can find companies that are in potentially a game-changing business, that have a product that's viable, that's proven out in the market already, at least early signs of it, then this is actually a really good opportunity to get involved in those kind of companies. Because really, at our stage, we're an early stage company. We're not raising a Series B, Series C super growth round. And so for us, investors and ourselves are looking at this as very long term. So we're looking at not where this company is going to be in 2 years, but where this company is going to be in 6 years, or where this company is going to be in 10 years. And when you look at that kind of time horizon, you realize that the pandemic, the recession, these are all, fingers crossed, temporary moments in time. And so that if we can get through this storm and you can be one of those game-changing companies, you come out on the other side considerably stronger than you went in. So I think that while the pandemic is making it challenging to build that early trust with investors, I think the opportunity is immense. And if you can find the right market to be in, and you can find the right technology to provide to people, I think it's actually a really good time to be out raising capital and to be building business.
Well, in terms of capital, and not necessarily kind of venture capital, but just the cold hard cash that you need to run a business, have you guys been able to tap into any of the federal measures that have been introduced, whether it's the CEBA, the Canada Emergency Business Account, or else maybe the wage subsidy of 75%? Are these things of use to a startup in your position, or has it been, well, hey, we can get by, why necessarily tap into those things if we don't need to?
So there's certainly been programs available. We took advantage of the IRAP. So there was a COVID-specific IRAP program that was released this year. We obviously, as a technology company, we have quite high engineering costs, and so we were able to take advantage of that. There were other programs such as wage subsidies that we could take advantage of, but particularly, I think maybe this is influenced because a lot of our customers are restaurant chains. We just felt that there's a lot of businesses that are in a position where their business cannot run without these sort of packages. For us, our business was ticking along. We've been able to pivot, we've been able to raise capital, we've been able to gain customers, and I understand, and our team understands, that there is a limited amount of cash available from the government for these programs. And so we felt that unless we absolutely need it, there's other businesses out there. I have a friend who runs a coffee shop, for example. That's the sort of business that really needed the support throughout this crisis. And so we just felt as an organization that unless we needed it, unless we really, really needed it, it wasn't our place to take it.
Well, what about overhead costs? Have they become more burdensome? Have you guys lucked out in any degree, or have you guys been able to cut some certain overhead costs that are able to keep you guys afloat just a little bit longer?
So I think our timing, we were very lucky with our timing with all of this. We were getting to the point where we were considering hiring more people, bringing more people on, throwing a bunch of capital at it, and going gung-ho for it. When this happened, we have a very lean team. We have very low overheads. In fact, our office downtown where I am right now, we paid very, very little. We got an incredible deal on this office space. And so our overheads are actually really, really low. And I think that we could have been in a position, had this happened 4 or 5 months later, where we could have brought new people on and we could have been in a very different conversation. However, because we've been scrappy so far. We've spent 2 years being scrappy and building this thing from a very small team. We're used to being scrappy. And so we haven't had the need to make any layoffs. We haven't had the need to furlough anybody. Everybody stayed employed. And it's the same team. And in actual fact, our team's actually been 30% more productive during the pandemic. I'm not sure whether that's just because we're so small, we have a passion about it, because we're a small team, we're a little family unit that's just passionate and kind of doubles down. or whether it's working from home more often. Maybe we shouldn't be in the office and we should all be working home forever. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, for us, we've been pretty lucky in terms of costs.
So what's your take? Because obviously you guys have still been able to stay successful as a startup during the pandemic. Do you think you guys are the rule right now? Do you think you're the exception? Do you think it's a little bit difficult to tell just based on the landscape that is still very uncertain?
That's a great question. I think it's really hard to know. It's difficult because we're in our own world, right? We are our own world, and it's difficult for us to apply that to everybody. Interestingly enough, we were in a program called TechStars in the US this year with 9 other startups all from different industries and different stages. And we saw a big change in sort of the view of each of these startups throughout the program. At the start of the program, certain companies were leading the pack, and as we moved on, it sort of moved around. And I think that it's hard to say that being successful in a pandemic, everyone should start a business immediately. Let's go out and all start businesses because it's all going to work. I don't think that's the case, but I do think that where some companies are going to struggle and be really, really impacted by this pandemic, some companies are going to benefit, and particularly in technology, it's going to be a mixed bag. I think it's really hard for us to say this is the rule. What I would say is, from my personal experience, just speaking, this is completely from anecdotal, but the last time there was a recession, I was working in the UK. I was selling life insurance, and I actually managed to meet and marry my now wife, move to Canada, and start a new career in technology, all within that recession. And I think a lot of it was about just taking risks because I didn't have a lot to lose. And I think that, whether we're an exception or whether we're a rule, I think the rule still stands that, if you have the opportunity to try something now, and it's something that you believe can survive throughout recession, throughout the pandemic, I think this is, in my opinion, it's actually no riskier than it was pre-pandemic to start building a business. I think it's a great opportunity.
Well, maybe on that note, what is your takeaway? And I know it's very early on into this pandemic, but are you guys benefiting from the acceleration of certain trends that other companies might be looking into, especially with what you guys are doing? Or do you think the company, what you guys would have been doing, you would have been better off, there would have been more stability had this pandemic never unfolded?
Now, that's a tough question to ask. Stability is nice. I think comfy shoes are nice. But sometimes you just got to try on something different. And it's really hard to know. There's definitely a move towards digital transformation. 100% now companies are thinking about transformation more than ever. And we're speaking to mining companies, to insurance companies. These are historically what we call technology laggards, not really driving the forefront of innovation. And even these industries now have mandates to innovate in the digital space. And so I do think that digital transformation has been accelerated. I do think that our ability to help those companies innovate is advantaging us. And I also think there's lots of other opportunities for various other technologies in outdated spaces. I was just talking to a founder recently about taking wills and putting them online. A really super early stage startup, but in an industry that's very outdated. And now is a great opportunity to start taking an outdated business and making a new business model out of it. So, my takeaway from this whole thing is whether it's going to make us better or not, it's in the past. It's happened. I don't think we can dwell on whether or not it would have been better without it or with it. We just have to knuckle down and say, this is where it is today. And we need to do the best we can within the realms of the pandemic and within the world that we're in today. And that's all we can do. So whether it's better or worse, I think that mindset doesn't really change.
Well, my last question is, what advice can you give people? But I think that's actually some pretty solid advice right there. And I think it is going to be amazing to watch this transformation unfold. It's stuff that we can't imagine 3 months in that's going to happen in like 6 months, a year from now. It's going to be fascinating to see that happen. And I want us to follow up in a few months. Let's see where you are at that point. And hopefully you guys will still be seizing on all those opportunities that seem to be emerging, even in a situation that we prefer probably not to happen. But for now, Chris, I want to thank you for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.
That's Chris Hurd, CEO of Olive, and that's it for the show today. We'll be back tomorrow. But in the meantime, go to biv.com for more interviews and more stories.